Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost, your host of the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Really happy to welcome you all back. It's going to be a jam-packed week, starting with a really important session today. So thank you for being here with us. And I want to thank folks for doing what I was about to ask you to do. You're doing it already, and that is to say hello in the chat. It really helps us to know who's here in the room with us, maybe which part of the country you're from. Any of that kind of stuff will really be helpful to our guests, and we love seeing it from you. Plus, it's a chance for you to get to know one another and to use that as your sandbox. So use, as you're doing already, thank you, Emily and Anne, Chuck, Sherry, Pat, for saying hello. Hello, Stephanie. Hello, Aaron, Sarah, Alex. Really do love seeing all these folks, and also to see where you're from. From Roanoke, which isn't too far from where we are, to, well, I don't see Nigeria today, or Kenya. But we've had folks from all around the world in this series, and I know that this subject is one that is going to resonate for people virtually everywhere. So we'll talk about all that in just a minute. But first, I want to welcome you here, and of course, use this as an opportunity to also thank our sponsor, DonorSearch. We won't be talking about them much unless our guests choose to talk about them for some reason, but it's not through any lack of affection or appreciation. If it were not for DonorSearch, among other things, we wouldn't have been able to host this series now going back to 2016. This is episode number 578, I believe, if I'm counting correctly. And you can find much of that content as well as the schedule for the future over at DonorSearch.net under the resource tab, where you'll find the whole Philanthropy Mastermind series, podcasts, webcasts, and webinars, including CFRE accredited sessions. If you're collecting those credits, you'll find all that again at DonorSearch.net. And while you're there, you can learn a lot about your donors. And since we're going to be talking about donors and being very careful about the donations they give us, I hope you'll take a look at that too. So with that, I want to welcome two friends here, Paul D'Alessandro, who's been in this series before. It's great to see you, Paul, and Rich Todd, a new friend, and welcome him as well to talk about the subject of why your nonprofit should care about the stewardship of donor dollars. Rich is the co-founder of Invest Portfolio Solutions. Paul is, among other things, VP for Invest and also founder and chairman of High Impact Nonprofit Advisors. And if you listen to the podcast series, you'll find an interview with him there where he also talked about his book, The Future of Fundraising, which I'm pretty sure you can find on Amazon. So once again, welcome to the two of you. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jay. Good to see you, Paul.
Yeah, same here.
Pleasure to be here. Yeah.
You're both in different locations. We can tell from what's in back of you. But where are you literally? Where are you?
I'm just outside of New York in New Jersey, not too far from the Jersey Shore.
And I'm in Denver. Denver's where Innovest is based, and we have people throughout the country, but I'm actually at home today, so excited to be here.
At altitude, yes, it's
at altitude.
Lots of amazing things happen up there. Well, thank you both again for doing this. I know that the way we talked about this topic today, you gave us really three areas that we're going to cover, and you've got a lot to share with us. But just to review, make sure I know what we're talking about today. You talked about the reasons why an organization should be concerned about financial stewardship and investment of donor dollars. We talk a lot about stewardship in the series, not a lot about stewardship of donations. And so I'm really glad you can dive into that. We'll be covering other things as well. But before we even go there, can you talk a little bit about why this topic is important to you? Rich, do you want to start?
Sure. We've been working with fiduciaries with nonprofit organizations for over 28 years. And we know that the law gives us some help in the way we should manage portfolios, but we've also found that donors really care as well. So especially larger donors, they want to make sure that you're a good steward of the assets that you're in charge with. And our role is to help make sure that our clients and the overall nonprofit community understands this, and it can be a big boon to their organization if they're good stewards.
How did you two come together in this work? Because I know both of you have a different history. You'll talk a little bit about the history in a minute, but how did you meet, Paul? What brought you all together?
Well, I've spent over 30 years raising money for nonprofits, and probably 35 years. And We have a mutual friend actually in Denver who, put us together. And I really loved, having gone on over 4,000 solicitation calls and talking to donors, and then seeing what Innovest is doing with nonprofits, with high net worth individuals. For me, I thought it would be a great fit for me to be part of something much larger than myself, who's doing a lot in this space, because there's such a big asset base right now, and it's playing such a big role in so many different things, in proxy voting, and we could go into a whole lot of different things. But so a friend introduced me to Rich, and Wendy is co-founder, and I kind of fell in love with the team and the place and the work that they're doing. Through the years, those of you who are fundraisers, you get approached by different entities, but this for me was a perfect fit for a lot of different reasons. And there's some, I'm just some great folks, and I have a lot of fun, especially when I get to visit out in Denver.
Not a bad place to visit.
No.
And I'm an Easterner too, so I love it where you are as well, Paul. I'm still kind of riddling with 4,000, trying to do the math in my head. I don't know if anybody else who's in the room with us responded the way I did. Probably you saw my face. 4,000 calls, donor visits is a lot. And even if you divided them up in 35 years, I'd be interested to know if anybody did the math about how many that is per month, because that's a lot of experience, which I'm sure you're going to bring to the subject now about the importance of this, stewarding these relationships and their donations. But I'm also just saying that it's kind of a clarion call to me that we have to get out there and actually meet with people, which again, I know is the cornerstone of what we're talking about today.
So yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. So where shall we begin? Would you like to share some of the content that you prepared first, and then we can dive into the discussion?
Sure. Before we begin too, at the outset, Jay, if there's any questions that kind of come to mind, will you flag them and
Yes.
ask Rich and myself? I do have a different background, but yeah, I'd be curious to know if there's any questions at the outset that we can address, because we've presented something and it's going to raise more questions, but I just wanted to put that out there for everybody.
Well, in fact, I'll invite everybody, if you have questions now, just based upon what you saw as we talked about this session in advance, if you have any questions, go ahead and start posting those either to the Q&A or to the chat, and we'll save all those up. If there's something urgent, we'll get it to you right away. But I wonder if there's anything we should inventory of the audience, Rich or Paul, something that would be helpful to know about who's here. So as you're talking about this subject, we can contextualize it for people.
Well, for me, I'm always curious how many, there's always going to be development people. There's always going to be executive directors, presidents, and board members. And I'm kind of curious if there's a mix, what the mix is. And then, sometimes we have volunteers on these as well, who just want to do something. And it's interesting because we have folks, I saw that from Kenya, from Mexico. So you have a pretty broad stroke.
And the experience is different for every organization, big and small, east to west, north to south. So we're starting to get answers right here. Thank you for that, Chuck. You just say, I'm a development office. So it may be a one-person development office. There are lots of those. Other folks here in the room, what are your roles within or for your organizations? It would really help as we're talking about the subject today. Just tell us if you're what your job is, perhaps. So we've got an executive director, a gift planning officer, development director, development assistant, development officer, charitable gift advisor, prospect research and development, director of advancement. It's going by pretty fast now. Admin supervisor, fundraising assistants, director of community engagement, community outreach, development and marketing director, donor relations specialist, major gifts officer with specialty in planned giving, a supervisor, fund development and PR manager, development associate, very new to the role. Welcome to the field. We've got a lot of people here, lots of different roles. Most of them, it sounds like, in a professional context, including a CEO. So that kind of gives you a flair for this. Anything, Rich, you'd like to know about who's with us today before we begin?
I think it's great. I think this gives us a good flavor. So, one of the things that we're going to talk about is the link between an investment portfolio and development, how actually investment strategy should be connected to that. So it's exciting to have so many development people here.
Maybe I'll go out on a limb then and ask if you have, what's the best way to ask that question? If you have an investment portfolio, whether that's in the form of an endowment or some kind of reserve, anything of that nature. And again, I won't even list names here or shout them out, but I think sometimes that's helpful to know. Many of our organizations operate pretty lean. Others do have a sizable reserve or even an endowment. So what do we find in the room? We can see that we have someone who has an endowment and a reserve. So first of all, congratulations on that. That's very helpful. Anybody else? Foundation, sure. Endowment funds. Someone else who mentions that they're extremely lean. You are not alone. So we kind of a composite of different kinds of situations. So I'm sure you'll be able to speak to that. The places that are contemplating what they need to do in order to properly manage these finances, these gifts, as well as those who have been doing this a while and maybe are looking for new ways to do that properly. So, Paul, I know you're at the reins. Would you like to dive into some of this?
Sure, and I'll share my screen, and I hope I get this right. It's in the multitasking role. So there's share. Oops, and there's this. Sorry, I think I have this right.
Okay. Give it a try, and we'll let you know if we can see it. And there it is. Now I guess you're just going to go over to
the
slideshow.
view. Yeah, view slideshow. There we go.
Perfect.
So, you know, I spoke a little bit about myself, but Rich, did you want to, because you're the CEO and you've put this amazing company together, perhaps you could share a little bit background too.
Sure. Let me just to frame out who we are. We manage our clients' assets are near 50 billion. We have around 300 clients or so, 60 employees, 20 partners. We're in 29 states, and we've been around for, we're approaching 30 years, believe it or not. Maybe that's why I look this way. Go to the next page, Paul.
Okay. Oops, what did I do here? Oops, there we go. Is that it? There we go.
So I think this presentation is applicable to foundations, endowments, operating reserves. I know that we saw some of those with everybody. Some of these basic principles also affect retirement plans. So we do manage retirement plans for nonprofit organizations. So I think some of this still applies. So we're excited to be here. Our clients include nonprofit charities, religious organizations, educational organizations, high schools, universities. Actually, our largest client is a university here in Colorado, and their assets are near 10 billion. So our client assets typically within our clientele range from, let's say, you know, probably a few 100,000 to in the billions. So all these principles apply regardless of size. So again, excited to be here, and we're ready to get going, Paul.
Okay. And, you know, the linkage too, we also have a lot of high net worth individuals who also are clients. So they're donors to the entities whose assets are managed, but we also manage their funds too, because of the alignment between our value set and their value set. So, you know, because my world has been fundraising, these are the things that I wanted to talk to. It kind of sets the framework for, you know, why we should be paying attention to donor dollars. The thing that I told about the 4,000 solicitations is, why is that important? The number's not so important as it is how the conversations have changed with donors in the last 30 years, because there's so much sophistication in assets, and there's so much sophistication too in what they know about nonprofits and managing money. So the first thing is, and this is my school of training, and that is fundraising is so relational. Why is that? and a lot of this is about stories. I was with a donor 2 years back, and he said he was tired of nonprofits referring to him as a giving unit. And what's happened is some nonprofits kind of take a tendency to look at individuals, and that's the world I've lived in, has not friends and people that they care about, and to understand their stories. And then as I was driving today, coming back to my office, I was talking to somebody about how important it is. They said, I'm just so afraid to ask somebody for money. And I said, it's really not about asking money. It's about, do you care about their heart? Do you care about what they care about? And does your organization care about what they care about? So and that makes asking somebody for money easy, but it's relational. So, and stewardship is also as important. We talk about the 4 pillars of identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And a lot of nonprofits forget about their stewardship. And it's not just the stewardship of the relationship, but it's the stewardship of the money that they've trusted your organization with. And, early on in the start of this, and I've watched this shift, is donors didn't ask as many questions as they ask now. Like, what are you doing with my money? Where's this going? What's the metrics? What's the impact? And I'm sure a lot of you have seen that. And we get way down into the weeds. But so making sure that you're paying attention to the individual, the stewarding the gift, but also stewarding the individual is important, very important. They say that solicitation should only be about 10% of the activity. It's the cultivation and the stewardship that are really critical. And then this last one, why is investing in fiscal responsibility so important to the success of the organization? If anyone who's been in this space for a long period of time, you could see the collapse of many organizations for not having financial reserves, not investing well, not paying attention, minding the store, having good investment managers. And now the donors are asking those hard questions too, like who's minding the shop? Where is the money going? Early on in my career, and I didn't understand this, people would say to me, well, why should I put money in endowment? I think I could get a better return than your organization can. Well, that's hard to say when you're working with somebody like Notre Dame, which is where I started, and they have a multi-billion-dollar endowment now. But it's a valid question. So these are the questions that you, especially in the development office, should be prepared to answer. And what I tell people is, if you're going out to see somebody, you should always be prepared to answer questions, even if they're not asked. So the reason number one that I have here is it demonstrates professionalism and quality of your organization. I think it just speaks for itself when you have a high level of integrity in the work that you're doing, in terms of knowing all the facts about where the money's going and how it's being invested and how it's being deployed, and the good that it's doing out in the world. So there's 3 points that I want to make here. I think if you see the quote, I like that one. 46% of donors stop giving for reasons tied to lack of meaningful information regarding their gift. And, we spend a lot of time looking at gifts that the donors who stopped giving, and people don't go back and ask, why did you stop giving? They're just trying to always get new donors, but your best donors are the ones that you have now. So when you prioritize the relationship and you have total transparency of what you're doing, it builds trust, and trust is just so important in so many things in our lives, especially when it comes to finances. I had a client a couple of years ago. They had multiple funds in their endowment. They had about $10 million. And one donor who hadn't heard from this academic institution called up and said, I put some money in, what's going on? And they couldn't really answer the question well. So he asked for his now $250,000 back. I counseled against it. I don't think it's a good idea. But of course, it was someone who was tied to, how this works, a friend on the board, and threatened to have the president removed. So they gave, because they couldn't answer any of the questions, they gave him back $250,000. They actually didn't give it back because that creates tax problems. They directed it to another charity of his choice. I've seen it not once, not twice, probably about a half a dozen times where donors have asked their money back for money back that they've gifted, because of poor transparency, because of poor stewardship. It also solidifies your relationship with the donors, because if they know that you have good professionals aligned with you, that you are on top of it with your investment committee, your finance committee, your development committee, then again, it builds more trust, and there's greater engagement. And of course, the last point that I make, and it's again obviously said, when they give you their money, they're not just giving you their money, they're trusting you with something far beyond it's that dollar bill, if you will, for lack of anything else. They are now committing to you, to your organization. I've spent my life around big gifts, but I've seen $1,000 be a big gift, and I've seen $100 million be a big gift. But that's why we say, involvement gets ownership, and ownership gets investment. So we want to keep people engaged, involved, and owning that, so they could feel that they're getting a good ROI. It might be emotional, but it's still an ROI. And then again, this other points I want to make: donors have choices that you're competing with very savvy fundraisers. Just by way of example, and because I love my university, Notre Dame. Notre Dame has, when I worked there in the 80s, so I'm dating myself, they had 30 fundraisers. Now they have 350 fundraisers on the ground. St. Jude's, which everybody knows about, which probably raised $2 billion in the last year, they have 400 professional fundraisers on the ground, asking people for money. So in the donors, some donors, I argue, have had more experience being asked by fundraisers than some may have had the experience of asking for big gifts. So, universities are great examples because their endowments promote the success of the organization, and people continue to give. I say money has like gravity. When people give money, then other money follows it, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. They have great teams of professional fundraisers who continually get strong continuing ed, and they get free planning to secure big gifts. Now, when I talk about free planning, we have somebody who's linked to and invest and could talk to the donors. So, I know that we don't have all the answers, because planned giving is one thing, major gifts another thing, social media and giving is all different. But when you could bring some planning experts to the table on estate gifts, on donating to businesses, there's a lot of foundations, like I'm thinking about one right now, McClellan Foundation. Gentleman gave his company to McClellan 30 years ago, and that company is now, in that foundation, is giving away $500 million in the last 30 years. But it also, again, you want to have that excellent transparency and communication with your donors, and they might not ask for it, but it's what they want, it's what they need, it's what's going to keep them coming back. So, Rich?
Thanks, Paul. So reason number 2 is really meeting fiduciary standards is the law. And if you could move forward, Paul.
Yes, sorry, there you go.
So in the States, most of you are governed by the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, MIFA. Now, I mentioned retirement plans earlier. Retirement plans are governed by a different IRS act, and it is called ERISA, and the basic tenets are very similar. So regardless of whether you are managing or you have operating reserves or a foundation or endowment or retirement plan, these principles all apply. So Number one, MIFA embraces delegation. So if you or your institution is managing assets, you are held to the standard of an expert. So if for some reason you're pulled into court, they are going to look at you like you actually are a professional in the investment world. And that is why the law encourages delegation. Most aren't. If it's Notre Dame, for instance, they have a big team of professionals managing money internally. But with most organizations, probably most of you with the size that you are, you've delegated those investment decisions, or you should delegate those investment decisions to a prudent expert or a professional firm. Now, at Innovest, we're a fee-only consultant. We're a fiduciary to our clients. We're a co-fiduciary. So if for some reason there's a problem, we're going to be there right beside you. One of the reasons that we're fee-only is it allows us to be a fiduciary. If your investment advisor is collecting commissions with the investment solutions or investment recommendations, they are held to a different standard. They are probably not a fiduciary. So that's something you should know. The law cares about fees, the reasonableness of fees. It doesn't always have to be the lowest, but if they're not the lowest, they have to be justified. So if you're a large donor, you're going to care about the fees of managing the portfolio of that organization that you're supporting. And you're going to want to know probably who's managing that money. Is the organization that you care about, are they a good steward? Are they beyond a great charity? Is their mission in line with the gift? But often big donors care about financial stewardship. Diversification, often they're sophisticated. Big donors are sophisticated. They're going to want to know how assets are managed, what the diversification principles are, stocks, bonds. The bigger the organization, the more likely they're going to be invested in alternative investments like private equity and private debt and real assets like real estate. So typically, like a large family office is going to be familiar with some of these investment vehicles, but this is also what the law embraces. In the end, the law embraces process. So there's never been a case where a fiduciary has been sued and lost because of bad investment performance. It's always the process. So the courts look at the steps that were taken to manage the portfolio. And the beauty of all this is if you are very process oriented and you're thoughtful, there are tenets around process for money management. You'll end up with a better track record or better performance. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah.
So some of the steps in a process include strategic planning, liquidity needs. Time frame is really important. The longer the time frame, the more aggressive the portfolio can be. If it's truly an endowment with a long time frame, probably there's a bias towards equities. If they're operating reserves, you still are a fiduciary, but typically your time frame is short, and the portfolio should take very little risk. So one of the things that we think is important is actually quantifying downside risk. How much, as an investor, how much would you be comfortable in seeing a portfolio drop in a short time frame, let's say a year? And if you have a very long time frame, like an endowment, if money drops, if the portfolio drops in value in a bad market, let's say it's 10%, it's very tolerable. But if you have a project that you're funding in the short run or their operating reserves, there's a lot of pain that comes with the 10% downside. So that's why that sort of strategic planning is so important. The other thing that is related to fundraising is, I would say, the better the fundraising with an organization is, or the more money coming into the organization, that is a formula to be more aggressive. And if there's not a lot of fundraising, if there's not a lot of money coming into the portfolio, that's a formula to be more conservative. Or if your distributions are high, that's also a reason to be more conservative. So all of those elements really help determine the overall goals and objectives of any portfolio. So, but it's not set it and forget it. You have a responsibility of monitoring, doing due diligence on your investment products and managers. And the last bullet here, document. So you should have minutes. I would say as a development professional, I would be reading the minutes of your investment committee meetings. Understand the investment policy statement. The investment policy statement is something that every organization should have. That's actually something that MIFA doesn't actually require, but it's preferred. It's preferred to have a document that outlines your objectives, outlines your process for portfolio construction, and then outlines your process for ongoing due diligence and monitoring. And if for some reason, again, if you're hauled into court, the first thing the judge is going to ask for is your investment policy statement. If you're a large donor, and we've worked, like Paul said, we've worked with many large donors, often they are very interested in that investment policy statement before they make that gift. And that, again, that demonstrates good stewardship.
Rich, we had a question from the audience, which dovetails what you were just talking about. Can I share it with you now?
Sure.
It's from Frank, who said, are you saying that donors will donate for the nonprofit's diversified investments? I guess that's assuming that they can see them. You just talked about that investment policy statement. So how important is it for to donors to know about the diversification of these investments?
I would say large donors really care. I work with a donor advised fund, a DAF. It's a large DAF. They have many donors that put their donation dollars into that donor advised fund, and on a quarterly basis, the donor advised fund puts out communication to their donors about the makeup of the portfolio. It varies from organization to organization. We actually work with, I think, 5 donor advised funds, and we manage the overall portfolio. Some share all the investments in the portfolio. Others just share the overall allocation, investment policy, investment strategies, but they don't share the investment products. So that's up to that organization. But in each case, they all care a lot about how the portfolio is managed, who's managing it, what are the basic principles behind it, and how is it doing from a performance point of view. So it varies in terms of communication, but I would say especially large donors, they really do care about the stewardship of those assets and how they're managed. And again, the larger the donor, I would say, the more sophisticated they are. That's not always the case, but if you're dealing with a family office, they may have their own investment staff, and they really do care about the overall approach that a charity or donor advised fund or organization is using in managing those assets.
Thanks very much. I'd love to follow up on that after you get a chance to go through the presentation. And I want to acknowledge Frank for asking a really astute question and encourage others to join in that conversation too. Please go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Okay, the next reason is it demonstrates values alignment. So we believe that values alignment is on a spectrum. I had mentioned early on that we work with faith-based organizations. They often care a lot about the values of the portfolio, so they may be, in some cases, screening out investments that they believe are objectionable. You can do that in a portfolio. And we believe typically, in most cases, that you can manage a values-based portfolio and that you should not have a give up of investment returns. For instance, a faith-based organization, they might want to screen out organizations that are engaged with, let's say, pornography or the technology behind pornography. Screening those companies out should not probably have any difference in the portfolio returns. In other cases, you have organizations that really care about the values of their investment managers. It's not just whether or not they can screen, it's whether or not their values are aligned. So, from one client to the next, some care about that, some don't. Some say, look, all we're trying to do is get the best returns that we can. We're not trying to make a statement as to our portfolio, but the archbishop in a diocese told us that he did not want to see his name in the paper or the diocese name in the paper because they were investing in pornography. So they're very they have very definite values. They have a values policy statement, and that helps determine how the portfolio is managed. There can also be positive screens, impact investing. We actually manage a faith-based donor advised fund, and they do some impact investing by often financing situations that are appropriate for them. Maybe they give them sub-market interest rates in financing. In this case, they financed a hospice, and they gave them a better mortgage than what they could get at the mortgage company. So those are ways that a nonprofit can use the dollars to go beyond just making good returns. And in that case, they probably will be getting a lower return, and that's something that they understand. So often they're going to dedicate a certain portion of their portfolio towards maybe those sorts of program-related investments or impact investments, maybe 5 or 10% of the portfolio. Another thing that we're seeing a lot more of is, and Paul mentioned this, a lot of attention is being paid to proxy voting. So it's not just how the portfolio is managed, but making sure proxies are voted in alignment with the values of the organization. And in some cases, we see organizations that are interested in being an activist even. And so in being an activist, they might actually own a small percentage of the objectionable securities, but it allows them to lend their name in maybe opposing a resolution. So we work with an organization that they actually are supporting combating lung disease. And so they carve out tobacco, cannabis in their portfolio. And in some cases, they're interested in being an activist when there's something that they find objectionable within a company, and they may be trying to force behavior in certain public companies, or they may be trying to resist something that the company is voting on, that their shareholders are voting on in some sort of resolution. So I would say the larger the organization, the more likely they're going to be more mission-based. But I would say that most nonprofit organizations are probably, at this point, more focused on traditional investing. But in some cases, like with the lung disease, or with religious organizations, or with environmental organizations, you see a lot more values-based investing inside an investment portfolio. And I think the good news is, like I said earlier, there are many more products in this space that should help you get returns that are very good and at least in line with more traditional investments.
So, thanks. I just wanted, Jay, I want to dovetail on something Rich said. Donors too are getting very sophisticated with respect to gift contracts. So I've seen donors walk away from giving a gift to an institution or an entity because the organization couldn't sign off on the gift contract. I mean, there used to be 2 or 3 pages or a letter of intent, and now there are many pages. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. And the other point that I wanted to make is, when I started fundraising and all this, people really didn't know what endowments were. So we educated, and so a lot of donors will ask about endowment and things like that. But what my point in the book that I wrote was, donors drive the change. So if you haven't heard the questions yet about investments, portfolios, all these things that Rich and I are talking about, be sure you will, because donors talk to other donors and they tell each other, what they're looking for in a nonprofit. So just wanted to share those thoughts. Our last point here, and we're just about done, is it enhances the relationship with the donors for future gifts and also referrals. So, we have to continually look, this goes to the stewardship, ways to engage the donors in the work that we're doing and how their money's invested. So we as a firm will do presentations on the investments. We'll have donor meetings if needed to secure large gifts for the organizations, for our clients. And we also do webinars about capital markets, because, like I said, you can't be all things to all people. And we'll also do board presentations for some of the nonprofits, just to educate them. Because, if you're in the development office or your CEO, there's a gauntlet sometimes you have to go through, and it's called the board. And the board, sometimes the saying is, you don't know what you don't know. And if they don't know about these things, then you're going to have to educate them about these things. And so, so it's good. This is good. I think good education as far as what's on the horizon and what's in play right now with a lot of nonprofits. So I think that's it. On my side, I just want to take some questions. Rich and I want to take some questions.
And actually, before we do that, do you have your contact information somewhere here, so that if people do
want
to find out more? Okay, there we go. And just in case someone is listening to this after the fact, that's Richard Todd, CEO, principal, and co-founder at Innovest Portfolio Solutions, and you can find him, of course, online. Paul was just last speaking. That's Paul D'Alessandro, who's the vice president there at Innovest, and that's all at Innovest Inc. That's INNOVESTINC.com. So I'm sure that we'll have other questions from the audience, but I definitely have a few too. So I want to encourage folks to be a part of the discussion. And before we get underway with some of that, I do want to remind folks that if you're interested in more of these sessions, you can find out about them and get a recording of this one over at DonorSearch.net, or you can join us this Thursday. We have another session coming up. That's with Jennifer Oyer, who is Community Impact Advisors, Chief Joy Officer, among other things. I love that title. She's going to be talking about the 5 relationships for successful nonprofit leadership. So it should dovetail well with what we're talking about today. You can find out more about that session and the rest over there at DonorSearch. So that's on Thursday at 3:30. I'm really fascinated with what both of you were talking about, especially in relation to that question that we had. And the one thing that really strikes me is that whether or not donors are aware of how an organization is investing its assets, and you talked about that, especially you, Rich. But the other part is maybe the unseen piece, which you can help us to understand. And that is when donors are thinking about, prospective donors are thinking about supporting your organization or another, or maybe a group of organizations, is this one of the things that they look at first in your experience? And if so, are they ruling out potentially organizations before we're even aware of it on the basis of A, transparency, and then if we provide the transparency, B, how we're managing the assets within a reserve or an endowment?
I think absolutely, especially the bigger the donor they are. Paul talked about the university field, or, these big organizations that have lots of gift officers.
Right.
And what, in most cases, they are very well oiled from an investment point of view. They have great firms that they're working with. They communicate very well. There's superb transparency. All that is why they're successful. People question, geez, Harvard got another big gift from somebody. They don't need it. Well, Harvard's impressive in the way they, everything about is not just the organization, but the school, university. It is the way they steward their assets.
And these discussions must be happening all the time, completely out of earshot of most of our organizations.
Yes, no doubt. No doubt.
So how are you finding out if it's not clear? In other words, let's think about it from the organizational perspective. If I'm at a 501c3 somewhere and and I do have an endowment, and I'm willing to share that information, but it may or may not be on the website. And so how is that going to be shared? What is the best way to make that available so that it provides just enough, but not so much that it's either confusing or whatever to the rest of the prospective donors who they're not going to dive into that. We're still talking about, like you were talking about earlier, Paul, a relatively small group of the donor pool, but a very influential one.
Well,
how does it?
How do we show the information? How do we display it? How do they find it?
It's a good question. This goes to the transparency thing. They're going to have the donors ask for it. So, but I don't know how to. I can't answer that question about how best to show it. Because communications, marketing communications, go hand in hand with development. But so much of that is focused on raising money, and they don't think about that piece of it. And sometimes it's just not that important to them, but it's important to the donor.
I would say, especially with big donors, they have some sort of deliverable that they're going to make. Not every organization is going to put their investment details on the website. They're usually, dedicated not to every donor, but maybe to the bigger donors, maybe in a way that they can even customize it for them. Some donor advised funds will have a lot of information about their portfolio on a website. So, but their role is different. Their role is different than a typical charity.
Yeah, I wonder if it's almost like a group, an elite membership group within the universe of the people that we care about, the people who support our mission. But how to communicate, that's interesting. We had a comment from one person who said, perhaps on our donor page, but Frank, who had asked the question earlier, also asked, are these policies something we should post online?
I would say from my perspective, yeah, I would say no. Like investment policy statements, things like that, I would say no. But part of it is you're competing, right? You want to be transparent to your donors, but maybe more discreet when it comes to your competition.
And Paul, I think you were about to say something as well.
No, it's exactly. I was going to say the same thing that Rich said. Is no, I wouldn't post it. So
there's this line about discretion, I guess, that you're waiting because it's important to be transparent, but that it's not like you're blowing a bugle and saying, "Here's our investment policies."
No, I mean, I just think that we're in such a competitive environment, and you know, with 1.5 million charities in the U.S., and then you take the impact investment funds, and you take all the DAFs, and you take all the fundraisers, you know, you just got to be careful because some people just don't work as hard to do things as others do. So let's just put it that way.
Right, right. Stephanie had asked earlier, first remarked on how she enjoyed the content, found it very interesting, and asked, to clarify, do you recommend that the nonprofit make presentations about investments and capital market education, or partner with a firm like yours or others to do that? I mean, what's the best way of, now we're talking about not digital and not, you know, sending something out to everybody, but those presentations that you talked about, this is, I guess, a select audience. What's the best way for the organizations themselves to do it, or to do it in partnership with their investment managers?
I would say, go ahead, Rich.
Go ahead. Well,
No, I'd say in partnership with the investment managers. I mean, like I said, you know, people come into the development world from all different backgrounds, and in the world of investment, there's so much, such a strong knowledge base that's needed. And sometimes it's like sipping water from a fire hose to try and learn all the information. And we're just trying over here in the fundraising world, just trying to figure out, how do we get a relationship? How do we make a gift? How do we make our numbers? And then you have all this information out there. It's like law, you know, you can't be, and I know some of the people online, they're like, as my dad would say, chief cook and bottle washer, but you have law, you have finance, you have state regulations, you have investments, you have donor privacy laws, now you have artificial intelligence. It's a lot.
I'm wondering if there's almost an analogy here to the discussion we've had, at least in years past, about planned giving, where you could have expertise, but that didn't mean you were going to advise your donors on how to give. You were merely there to provide information and to steward the relationship. Is that a fair kind of analogy?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is kind of out of the box of the questions we've been fielding, but when is an organization ready to make the leap and do the kind of work that you're doing with your clients? So I'm not speaking just of Innovest, of course, but I mean, in general, an organization probably is not in any position to manage their own investments. That's probably a safe. Okay. So when are they ready to go and seek the advice of an investment manager? Is it at $1? Is it when they have a plan even before they've collected $1? Is it when there's a reserve there, but it's being managed by the bank? When are they at the point when they can make a good partner so that they can do all the things you've been suggesting?
I would say it comes with really time frame. Once they're beginning to raise assets for the long run, they should have somebody that is a prudent expert to help them, really regardless of size. And I would say, you know, it's interesting how the better the fundraising organization, the more they care about having, you know, good quality portfolios, good quality vendors, managers affiliated with that. So they understand the importance of quality. I was going to mention earlier, we work with a hospital, and it's a relatively small hospital in the middle of Kansas. They raise a lot of money, and once a year, we go to an evening. They're offering cocktails and hors d'oeuvres to their donors. They invite many of their donors, probably prospective donors, and their best donors. You know, we all know that sometimes the best sales force is your current donors. So they put them together, and they give 15 minutes on what's going on within the hospital and within the foundation. We speak for 15 minutes on the capital markets and the portfolio, and then they spend 15 minutes on a couple of case studies with planned giving. And I can tell you how I just know that those evenings are lucrative, and they're building community, but I would imagine they pay for themselves many times over.
There was something that Paul said earlier that I love, which is that money has gravity. It's a great expression. I'm going to use that in the future. But it seems like you've just defined what actually is in that gravity. Because if you have all the things you two have been talking about, then it gives the organization gravitas. And then therefore there's, people one after another will find that it's a reputable and responsible resource, and therefore be more willing to make their charitable investments, their philanthropic commitments, to something that they can trust. And they've seen that trust develop, that gravity develop, by watching their peers, just as Harvard has done so successfully, as you said, Rich. Thank you both so much for all this, really helpful. Again, everybody, would you mind, Rich, just again telling everybody what the URL is for the company, so people can find you later?
Yeah, it is innovestinc.com, www.innovestinc.com. And
Perfect.
both Paul and I are there, and I think you have our website or our email addresses as well. So.
And everybody will be receiving an email after today's session within the next 24, 48 hours with a link to a recording of this, so you can share it with your colleagues who are also riddling through these questions and thinking, well, do we need a plan and a policy? And the answers are yes. But this will hopefully give you a little additional leverage for that conversation with a couple of folks who really know how to do it. So thank you both very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody in the audience for being with us and asking great questions and thinking through these issues. I know they're complex, and hopefully we'll see you Thursday as well for another great session in the Philanthropy Mastermind series. So until then, take care. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And fill out the survey, folks. Bye.
Bye. Okay. Do we stay on? Yes, we stay on.